Hello, my name's Bev and I'm the author of the book Please Eat, A Mother's Struggle to Free Her Teenage Son from Anorexia, which describes our family's battle with the deadly eating disorder, anorexia nervosa, which my teenage son Ben developed back in 2009 when he was just 15 years old. Before I upload the posts from the end of July 2011, I thought I'd talk a little bit more about our recovery contract, because I mention it an awful lot at this particular time. So rather than just repeat myself in every blog post, I thought I'd just read a little bit more about it. Obviously, the recovery contract wouldn't suit everyone, and in our experience, it had to come at exactly the right time when Ben was ready to move on, but he just couldn't. He was unable to, because the eating disorder, and especially the exercising and the need to eat more to put on weight, was really holding him back. And he had been in a kind of limbo for much of the beginning of 2011 and was getting really frustrated. And by Easter, I was wondering what on earth we could do to help him move on, to give him a kind of leg up onto the next rung of the ladder, so to speak. And I'll just read a couple of sections from my book, which is called Please Eat. You'll find a link below. I'm worried that Ben is on a plateau and finding it very hard to move forward. The psychiatrist doesn't seem to have any solutions, and neither do I, and we've spent the last few CAM sessions achieving very little. At one session, Ben becomes extremely upset. He feels disillusioned and frustrated at the sheer snail-like pace of recovery, not just within his body, but within his mind too. I'm worried he might be thinking of giving up. What he needs is something to kickstart the recovery, but Ben isn't interested in anything the psychiatrist or I suggest. Instead, I find the answer on the Around the Dinner Table forum. That weekend, by coincidence, a parent has posted a thread entitled Contracting Ideas. This family has been on an intensive family therapy program at the University of California, San Diego's Eating Disorders Center for Treatment and Research. The thing that was proving the most helpful in their daughter's fight to overcome her eating disorder was something called behavioural contracting. In its purest form, from what I can gather, behavioural contracting is all about encouraging positive behaviours and discouraging negative eating disorder behaviours using a programme of rewards and incentives. Contracts are a collaborative effort between parent and child. A series of goals is set out, covering issues like eating, exercise, and weight gain. If the young person achieves a goal, they get a reward. In this family's case, it was gift cards or points towards sleepovers, visiting friends, babysitting, and so on. If the young person fails to achieve a goal, they simply don't earn the reward, so there is no punishment, just gentle, positive encouragement. Or at least that's what I can see from Googling around to find out more. I suspect that contracts wouldn't be effective at every stage of recovery. After all, you wouldn't want to find yourself bargaining or colluding with the eating disorder. But with a young person like Ben, who has arrived at a stage where he is hell-bent on kicking the eating disorder out of his life, collaborating on something like this might just give him the motivation and kickstart he needs. Each young person's needs are different, so no two contracts are alike. Contracts are also very fluid. In other words, they can be tweaked and changed as your child progresses, focusing on overcoming new problem areas or dealing with new challenges. For example, on the Feast website, I find a college transition contract aimed at easing a young person into college or university, and a relapse prevention contract. All these contracts are flexible. The last thing you want when you are trying to free your child from the confines of an eating disorder is to create a straitjacket of rigid rules or routines. Finally, because everything is written down on paper, a contract isn't like a verbal agreement that can be quickly forgotten or denied. It could be just what Ben needs to ease him out of a rut. I decide with nothing to lose by giving it a go. If it doesn't work, then we'll discard it. But in the event, our contract proves to be one of the most effective things we've done, and it comes at exactly the right moment. And that's the end of that particular excerpt from my book. And I was delighted that Ben said, yes, brilliant, let's try it out. And so I talk a bit more about it in the following chapter. Let's do points, I say, getting out an exercise book as we sit down and talk, initially on a daily basis and later every few days or so. Ben gets points for eating sufficient, with extra points for going over his daily calories. He wins points for weight gain. The more weight he gains, the more points he wins. There are points for challenges, challenge foods or meals or socialising, attending school, basically anything he's finding difficult. We talk about why these things are still a challenge and how he might overcome them. And we look back on how he overcame earlier challenges to see if he can adopt similar tools to deal with the current challenges. Gradually, new challenges become old challenges before being phased out altogether as they morph into everyday behaviour. Then more challenges are introduced. Things I could never in a million years have dreamed that Ben would eat or do when he was drowning in the anorexia. Ben decides on his own challenges, but I expect at least one proper challenge a day. Some days he doesn't manage this, but with a bit of discreet encouragement, he'll quickly move on and conquer something else, or return to a particular challenge at a later stage. Ben gets points for keeping within agreed exercise limits, or preferably for doing less exercise. He gets points for attending school. The longer he manages to stay in school, the more points he gets. Points win prizes, he smiles whenever I add up the points and reach for my wallet. One day, Ben comes back from school saying they've been studying contracts in A-level psychology as a means of aiding recovery from some mental illnesses and addictive behaviours. This immediately moves the contract from the realm of one of Mum's schemes into something that's officially endorsed by the mental health world. Brilliant, I think to myself. That psychology lesson couldn't have come at a better time. Later, in the summer of 2012, as I'm putting my book together, Ben talks to me about the contract. I admit it was a cash incentive at first, he says, but gradually it became less about money and more about wanting to get better. He points out that the contract relies on honesty. It wouldn't have worked in the bad old days when the eating disorder used to lie, he says. By this stage I was being completely honest with you about what I was eating and what was going on inside my head. What the contract did really well was to get me out of the rut I got into and help me to move on. Of course, not everybody would advocate swapping points for cash, but for Ben it worked really well because he was desperate to get a new Xbox, and so it became almost like a young person who does chores to earn money to buy something they really want, and it just seemed to be a great idea to use the contract in this way, and it works really, really well with us because, as I just said, initially he used to think of it as a cash incentive, but the more we did the contract, the more it became about seeing real, genuine recovery and lights at the end of the tunnel, and the feeling that yes, he really could start to try and get his life back, a life after the eating disorder. Yes, of course, there were areas of the contract which were almost impossible to do anything about. For example, insomnia. Ben was suffering from severe insomnia in 2011 and the latter half of 2010. But gradually, by working on the other areas, so they became less problematic for him, that enabled him to relax, which resulted in a better night's sleep. A good thing about the contract was it did turn the consistent weight loss on its head. So Ben began to gradually increase weight rather than losing it or maintain weight. It would have worked better had Ben been given a proper eating plan, and which was much higher in calories. Looking over various scientific papers, it is clear that a young person who's recovering from a restrictive eating disorder needs to eat an awful lot of calories to put on quite a little bit of weight, really. And the calories that Ben was on was far below what it should have been for a boy of his age and build. And I would have really liked to have seen Cam's push for higher calories and insist on a more sustained weight gain, because, as I said, the contract meant that he didn't lose weight anymore, because he had been consistently losing weight, but he kind of didn't gain masses and masses of weight, but it did help stop the rot, and also it helped to make sure that he had a much more balanced diet, which in itself was really helpful in healing the brain, I believe, which meant that he was able to take things on board much more rationally. You'll find a link below to my blog, and you'll also find a link to my website where you can download free PDFs of my blog, and also a link to Amazon where you can buy a copy of my book.